Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending Metro Community College Advising Conference. I have Rachel Neurath and James Cloyd that are going to be leading the presentation. I'm going to start with introducing Rachel. Rachel Neurath is a math instructor at Metro Community College. Including her years as an adjunct, she's been here for 18 years. Prior to joining the MCC family, she had taught at public schools for Omaha, grades 8 through 12. So she does bring a unique perspective from the public setting into the community college or higher ed setting. For the last 4 years, Rachel has served as the math department coordinator. In this role, she has to work across departments and neighboring universities to help in mathematic needs and MCC's diverse student population. Thank you for being here, Rachel. Next, I have James Cloyd. James has a master's in organizational management. He has worked at Metro Community College for the last 20 years, holding a variety of positions such as an academic advisor, director of student services, director of Applied Technology Center, and the Fort Omaha campus dean, as well as his, I believe, his current position as Dean of Technology and Learning Support Services. James has also implemented numerous first-year experience applications, and he co-sponsored the Alex Math placement, which I'm sure we're going to hear something about today in this presentation. Without further ado, why don't you guys go ahead and take it away?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Rachel, I think we'll let you go ahead and start with the learning outcomes, and we'll get at it.
All right. Well, good afternoon. And Matthew, are you driving our slideshow just to kind of pass forward to the learning outcomes slides?
KP will be hitting the next slide.
Okay. Thanks, KP.
Yep.
All right. So basically, what we're going to discuss today, your learning outcomes for our session, we're going to talk about the challenges that are faced with advising, assessing, and placing students in their appropriate math course, particularly remotely, which has been our recent reality. The impact of those efforts, how technology has impacted that. You know, the gains in technology have been substantial, and then reflect upon what we've learned, proficiency, what we're adapting, how we'll move forward with what we know so far. All right, and we can go to the next slide.
All right, so on this next slide here, we're just going to give you a little overview about MCC. We know there's some folks that are not from Nebraska. Talking a little bit about Metro, MCC is one of 8 community colleges here in Nebraska. We're on the quarter system still, so we have roughly about 10, 11 weeks within each of our 4 quarters. Summer's usually the shortest. We do offer some 5-week sessions that are accelerated to go pretty fast. We serve 4 counties. We have 3 campuses, 3 centers, 4 satellite locations. If you look at last fall, 2020 fall, we had roughly about 13,244 students on duplicated headcount. Prior to COVID the year before, we had about 1,000 more students. If you look at the graph here, we have, you know, when you look at faculty and staff, we have just under 2,000 full-time, part-time faculty and staff. MCC has a decentralized advising model with the first year advising and special cohort advising for our programs and for programs like TRIO and so on. Next slide, please.
So the main problem from the math department perspective is really regarding the developmental math sequence. We offer 3 levels of developmental math, and we were finding that a lot of students were getting stuck in that sequence and not ever making it up to a credit level math course, whether it be a math course that is a transfer to a 4-year university or one that would help them earn an associate's degree. We have some data from our 2018 fall through summer 2020 cohort, and roughly 33% of all new students that fall began their college in a developmental math course. And out of those students, only 23% continued on and passed a credit level math course. So we're losing a lot of students. They're getting stuck. They're not making it through, and then they're giving up for whatever reason. We see roughly, 292 of those students received an R in that first math course, which meant they were trying but not succeeding and given the opportunity to take the course over. And out of those, only 21% continued on to take a credit level math course. And so that was one problem that we're looking to address. All right, next slide, please.
All right, the next slide. When you also look at the problem from the student services perspective, a couple of things came to mind. Delays to completing the first advising appointment. Prior to COVID, a lot of times during what we call our busy period, usually about 2 to 3 weeks before the start of the term, we get really inundated with advising appointments and things like that. And so a lot of times what staff will try to do is they'll try to help students along so they don't, wait 3 or 4, sometimes 5 days to have that first advising appointment, only to have to go and get placement testing. We kind of got in the habit of just then making placement testing kind of the first step to getting started at MCC, where when we know that sometimes students may have other measures and may not need placement testing. And so that was one of the things that we identified, is just getting students to that first advising appointment first. How were they directed to placement testing? Well, sometimes it was just looking at the schedule and seeing that, wow, it's going to be 4 days before the student could get in. Let's maximize the time and at least have them do their placement testing first. Sometimes they were referred by a friend or a family member, or sometimes they just looked on the website and they decided to get started. The other thing that we were trying to avoid was, transactional advising. Sometimes it can be very easy to, send a student to placement in order to get scores, in order to, place them into the classes based on the scores, versus maybe sitting down, having a conversation with them, talking with them about their experiences, what they've done, and so on. If you go on to, there's a quote here that I have at the bottom of the slide from Dean Bob Jacobson. And basically it just reads, requirements are not a primary goal in and of themselves. Putting them at the front of the discussion makes the student's academic career all about limitations and the least one can do to meet the requirements. And that quote really resonated with me, because if we're not careful, sometimes we can go through the habits of setting limitations on our students by having them do placement first prior to having those conversations. The pandemic allowed us to kind of address a little bit of this issue by really taking a step back and saying, okay, we're going to, really define this step that we want all new students to meet with a success navigator or an advisor to really identify where they're at. We also did some training with our testing technicians to ask some simple questions to determine if a student should actually take a placement test or if they should stop and be redirected back to a success navigator or an advisor. Next slide, please. Okay. Another problem that we faced when students would arrive to the testing center to schedule their placement appointment, often we noticed that those students did not take the time to practice or to brush up on their math skills. So a lot of times these students were just coming in and they just decided cold turkey, woke up on Monday, I decided Monday afternoon I'm going back to school and I'm taking the test Monday evening. And we know that if students, have an opportunity to kind of practice and brush up on their skills a little bit, they're going to do a lot better than just coming in and taking the placement test at the last minute. So with AccuPlacer, we actually had a study app. And with that study app, we didn't know like if students actually spent 5 minutes in the study app or if they spent 5 hours in the study app. We also didn't know what topics that they were really covering because it was just kind of broad. So if a student really needed to work on problems for algebra because they've already mastered, integers and things like that, we had no way to help direct that student that way. And then when you look at the AccuPlacer test, it consisted of multiple choice questions. So it was pretty easy for students to kind of go in and narrow the choices down and guess. Whereas when we talk more about the ALEKS, we'll talk about how it actually has 30 questions regardless of your math ability, and through the analysis as you answer questions, it's determining what you know and what you don't know, but you never have more than 30 questions regardless of your math skills and ability. Next slide, please. So here we want to talk a little bit about multiple measures. Here at MCC, we've used multiple measures probably for about the last 5 or 6 years, but we weren't very intentional in using multiple measures until the pandemic. And it really caused us to take a step back and go back and actually do some training on multiple measures. And so when you look at the slide here, one of the things that we talked about was using the high school transcript as a way to get students started. And so we actually had a process created where if a student had at least a 2.8 GPA and they had completed 4 units of math, meaning Algebra 1 for a year, geometry, Algebra 2 for a year, and then a higher level of math, they could actually, with those 3 classes, with 3 years of math, we had identified certain math classes they could get into without having to take a placement test. If they had 4 units of math, then there was a higher level of math that they could get into. We also looked at not penalizing students when they're 1 point off. So, you know, for example, if you needed a 21 to get into one of our algebra classes and you had a 20, we could say, okay, because you also have a 3.0 GPA, we're going to give you a bonus point. So that 20 is now a 21. You now qualify for the course you're trying to get into. We also looked at AccuPlacer, and we developed a system to add points to the AccuPlacer score using the GPA as well, and then with the next generation. So we went back to kind of the basics and just redid training with all our advising staff, and really asked staff to focus in on what exemptions do students have for testing, as opposed to, you know, making testing the first option. Next slide.
And then just to continue with that multiple measures, as we go to the next slide, we also set cut scores for placement based on an ACT score or a GED. So students who are coming to Metro right after taking their high school equivalency exam weren't then handed another placement exam based on their GED math score. We could place them into a course. So that just, again, trying to eliminate barriers, taking the student where they are. One of the things that I did, as you know, when I took on that role as a department coordinator, the dean and the department coordinator, between the two of us, will often field questions from advisors. And we extended that pool of people, and we have at least one point person designated from the math faculty at each of our campuses, because we do have several campuses across the metropolitan area, so that those advisors have more than just the dean or me to reach out to, and they can reach out to someone who's on their campus with a question. The key here is to making sure that the students get placed in the right courses, and advisors are fantastic, and we appreciate absolutely everything advisors do, but they can't know everything. So when there is questions about what skill level does this translate to, when I'm looking at this transcript, I can't quite tell what this means for the math placement. We've done that, and I have at least one faculty member at every campus who's kind of gotten a little quick and dirty training on placement to help field those questions. And that communication, I think, has really grown a lot. And then a year ago, this June, so just 13 months ago, we started using another placement tool rather than AccuPlacer. And James hinted at that, and that's the ALEKS PPL. And PPL stands for Practice Prep and Learning, or Placement Prep and Learning. And we also have an optional boot camp that we're offering with that. And there's some, we'll talk a little more about that boot camp in a bit. And as we switch to the next slide, I'll just continue talking a little bit about those prep and learning modules that the ALEKS feature has. It is a feature. So when a student goes through the ALEKS prep and learning, so they do need to take a placement test, that test includes these prep and learning modules. So the student takes an initial test. I like to tell them it's a pre-test, just their initial placement. And then the program will open prep and learning modules based on that student's performance. And they're not multiple choice. They have to answer, it's free response, which makes it a more authentic form of assessment than multiple choice. The prep and learning modules have a brief intro page with a little instruction and a worked out example. And then the student is directed to go forward and they do 3 to 5 examples, 3 to 5 questions. And as they get them right, there's a graphic bar that kind of fills in. They master that skill, then they move on to the next skill. And the thing about this is they're not teaching it. They're reminding these students. They're just brushing up on skills. They have them. It's just reminding them, you know, sometimes our math skills get rusty if we don't use them for a few months or a few years. So what we've, and we're going to, in a few moments here, get to the results and what we can see with that. We have found, though, for the students that utilize the prep and learning modules, they are really effective. So was one of our go-to solutions that we've worked with in just the last year. And then we can slide to that next slide on the show and get into some of those results.
Yeah, and so before we go into these results, one thing I'll mention, when you look at the assessment tool that we were using, the AccuPlacer, students had one retake that they could, use within a 2-year period of time, and they had to have the advisor's permission in order to do that retake. And so it was pretty limited to, that second retake if you got your advisor's permission to do that. Whereas with the ALEKS, the student has 4 retakes that they can take within a 1-year period of time, but it's all related to the practice within the PPL. And so we intentionally set it up that after your first assessment, you would have to do 3 hours of practice to unlock the second test. And then thereafter is 5 hours of practice you would have to do. And then in order to kind of, keep some consistency for any student who said, you know what, I was just getting used to the computer, that first test, I wasn't feeling it. The advisor could still override that first 3 hours and say, hey, I would like to have the student count the first test as a practice and go ahead and retest immediately. So that was a big difference that we made. If you look at this graph here, what you see, you can see students who completed assessments 1 through 5. And this first graph here, if you look at it, what it shows, as you see more of the blue towards the left, towards the 0, that gives you an indication of where our students were as far as the skills that they had mastered. If you look at the second graph, you see that blue starts moving a little bit more towards the right. Same thing with the third graph and so on. And so some of that is intentional because those students are actually spending time in the practice modules before they take their next placement exam. And then the other thing that we thought about as we were implementing this during the COVID was making sure that our cut scores aligned with UNO. UNO is one of many partners that we have as far as transfer partners and things like that. A good percentage of our students will transfer to UNO, Bellevue, and so on. And so we wanted to make sure that the process that we were creating would actually allow seamless transfer for students to transfer to UNO, UNO students to come back here and take a math class and so on. So this aggregated data that you're looking at here actually is a representation of our 2 cohorts. And internally in the testing center, we nicknamed them the ALEKS Zoom cohort and the Respondents Monitor cohort. Our testing technicians actually had to, because they were working remotely, they had to, learn how to actually administer all of our assessment tests, certification tests, and things like that all remotely. And so Zoom kind of became the go-to for us. As we got comfortable with Zoom, we went from doing one student placement test to proctoring 4, sometimes 5 students at one time. And then with the respondents monitor, what it allowed us to do, it allowed us to allow the student to pick a time that was more convenient for them. So if they wanted to work all day and take the placement test at 8 o'clock in the evening or Sunday morning, they could do that. And the respondents monitor would walk them through the steps to log in, and it's set up that it actually records them while they're assessing, and then it flags any suspicious behavior. Next slide, please. Here's where we get into the good things here. Okay, so we start talking now about what's the impact. What have we noticed? Since changing our intentions of making placement like the 3rd, 4th option of getting started, and then changing up the math placement. Well, what you see here is a highlight. It's just a short little sample of some scores. And so where you see these green arrows, basically that indicates where a student initial assessment was compared to their mastery of skills compared to their current mastery. So if you look at the first green arrow, you'll see 12% was initial. This student was up to 65% mastered. Total topics learned were 104. If you scroll down to the next green arrow, that student started at 25, they're up to 48, but they learned 106 topics. And you can see, again, the amount of time that the student had participated. And so we're looking at things like this. Even this 4th arrow, the green arrow here, a student started at 30% mastery, 48%. The student only spent 3 hours, which was the minimum, that you need to spend in order to unlock the next test. Number of topics learned were 78. For our students, that could be huge, especially if you're just one score away from testing into the next level of math. Next score, please. Our slide, please. Here's an example of a student. Student came in, and if I look at kind of the background of this student had already taken some math classes before. In fact, they had taken applied calculus at another school, but it was about 2 years ago. And this student was attempting to get into college algebra. Well, in order to get into college algebra, you have to score at least a 35. With this student's initial placement test, they scored a 13. Student ended up spending about 7 hours in the practice modules and did their second assessment. And that's one of the things that we explain to the students. 3 is the minimum, but you actually can do more than 3. So if you want to do 6 or you want to do 7 before you do that second assessment, that's perfectly fine. Well, the student completed the second assessment and actually scored a 60. Now the student only needed a 35, but actually scored above that level. Because this is a placement test, the student didn't test out of college algebra, but was able to register for that class and completed the class successfully. Next slide, please.
All right, so what we see here is just another illustration of how the time the student spends in those prep and learning modules can pay off in improvement. So students who spent up to 4 hours in those practice modules in ALEX, roughly 62% of them improved their placement. Students who spent 4 to 8 hours, 68% of them showed an improved placement on their second exam score, and so on. So again, this is just a drive home. And again, we have a relatively small sample size, only 215 students, but these are powerful numbers. The time that you put into it does pay off. And so one of the things we saw on that. And then the next slide is another graphic. Oh, or there's one more. There we go. Next, there it is. And here we have just a comparison, students who were placed based on ALEX or students who were placed with another method, not using their ALEX placement practice. So in our and we kind of broke it up into 3 sections and then our overall. So our developmental level courses, we see students who did some placement via ALEX. We have a 73% versus 65% pass rate in the course. For our associate level courses, and that's like our business math, our technical math, our culinary arts math course, very similar, close to the same number, 71% versus 74. And then our transfer level courses, I think, is where we see another big improvement. And so this is, you know, college algebra on up, college algebra, statistics, calculus, and so on. 71% success rate for those students who are just placed in there based on another avenue. 83% pass rate in those classes for students who utilize the ALEX prep and learning and placement. And then the last set of bars there is just an overall aggregate for all 3 levels. But I thought it was useful to break it down to the 3 levels: our developmental, our associate level math courses, and our transfer level. Okay. Next slide.
So next, we talk about the boot camp. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to be more intentional in making math less scary for students. And so looking at some of the things that we've done in other programs, when we look at like the first year experience, we look at TRIO and so on. One of the things that those programs have in common is that they have an assigned advisor and they have guidance in helping them navigate, you know, through college. And so with this boot camp, what we did is we actually created these Zoom sessions, because we're all working remotely, where students could actually log in every Tuesday evening or Friday morning with a math instructor and basically get some help, have their questions answered. We encouraged them to do this after they completed their first assessment, so they actually had an idea of what they wanted to work on. We did a welcome video, and we actually had an advisor or a success navigator that would attend. We eventually made a videotape of the welcome session, just so we wouldn't delay students getting started. But we really depended upon the support of the faculty to actually host these coaching sessions, and then our advisors and our success navigators to actually recommend to their students to actually sign up for the boot camp. And so if you click on the next slide, there should be a drop-down quote here. Here's a quote from one of our advisors. It said, Tanya took the ALEX and tested into Math 0900. I emailed her the flyer for the math boot camp so she can sign up for the July 27th. She was very interested, and I think it'll help her out before the next retake to place into a higher math. You know, just right there, you know, when you have your advisor who believes that you can do it, and not only that they have that conversation with you, but they're actually noting that in the advising note so everyone else can see that and also help the student along, is very powerful. If you go to the next slide, please. And here's another one. It says, this is an email that was sent to the student. I have given you permission to retake the ALEX assessment. I believe ALEX will require you a certain number of study hours before you can retake. Please contact the testing center with any questions, and don't be embarrassed. Just do the best you can. Sometimes you have to start from right where you are. It's okay. You can always learn and build up your skills. You've got this. But this is just an example of, you know, with this math, you know, a lot of students really don't enjoy math, and the expectations that we set with students, and we can make it less scary for them, let them know that they have support. A lot of times that just makes it a little more easier for that student to go and get started. And what we have here now, this is just we took our 9-minute video clip and pared it down to about 2 minutes, but we just want to give you a highlight of some of the things that was going on. Because these were all done during Zoom, we decided to make the welcome video in a Zoom format. So it has a little bit of the glitchiness that you see sometimes in Zoom, but we did that intentionally because we wanted to kind of create that remote experience from the start. So if you could hit play, please. You have to enable editing, and then you should be able to hit play. Okay, well, what I will do, I will email you the link here really quick. 1 second.
I'm sorry, technical difficulties.
No, that's okay. Let me.
We're used to that.
I don't know why.
I thought about sending that to you just in case.
Yep. I don't know why it's doing the new slideshow. Sorry, y'all.
It worked for Matt.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go to the video. Oops. Let's try that again.
Hmm. That's not what I wanted. Sorry.
That's all right. I just had to go find the link here. So let me copy this. Shareable link. Okay, and then I'll put it in the chat here for you. There you go.
Awesome. Thanks.
The link in the chat as well, James.
Yep, I put the link in the chat. Did you see it? There we go.
There it is.
My name is Manar Asukayir, and I am a math instructor in MCC. I've been working in math more than 10 years, and math is my favorite topic. Actually, I am here to help you, support you, to provide you the grades.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Christensen. I'm an academic in health careers programs here at Metropolitan Community College. And of course, health careers programs is one of many of the areas where you're going to use a lot of math. I'm glad that you're all here. This is a great opportunity to be taking advantage of. You know, you're going to have an opportunity to kind of dive in, study, review, retool, build upon, refresh your math skill levels, all with kind of the hope probably of advancing yourself a little bit up the math curriculum scale, right?
So like say for instance, I have a question in regarding to the math that I'm studying. Will I be able to just email you if I have any questions like you were saying, and then we might be able to Zoom or?
Yes, of course. As I
Okay.
said, during your practice, you can directly go ahead and email me, and I will be happy to help. Either we directly sit a Zoom or find a good time work for both of us to go through this in details and make you feel, understand the skills and move forward.
And just like Manar was mentioning, you know, I'm here to help you, get you, you know, a little review before you take that placement test a second time so you can place in the correct course rather than sit through a course or even two courses that are below where you really are, wasting your time and wasting your money. We don't want you to have to do that.
Congratulations for being here. Best wishes and good luck.
So that's, sorry about the technical difficulties there, but that was just a little, you know, highlight of just how we wanted to start off this boot camp with the students. We wanted it to be very welcoming, and we wanted the students to feel like that they had support in order to reach their goals. More importantly, they weren't registering for a class, they were actually having a chance to build their skills and reassess and hopefully place into a higher level as a result of their work and their efforts. This next slide here, it just basically kind of highlights where am I at here? The placement results. And so this is all the students. One of the things that was a little bit shocking when we actually looked at this data is that, you know, 1,342 students, they took one placement and they were done. They didn't take advantage of the opportunity to do a second assessment. We'll have to go back and look at that and, you know, see if most of those students were registering during our busy time, or maybe just not enough awareness. Maybe we need to do a better job of, you know, coaching them along. We had 229 students that actually did the second assessment, 48 students that did a third one, and 13 students that actually did a fourth assessment. And as you can see in the second column here, the placement score went up each time. So, you know, on the average for the first one and done, they had roughly about a 18-19. Well, that 18-19, based on our cut scores, would put that student in the math 0930, our math 1220, 1240, Most of those were those, that was our beginning, one of our developmental math classes, and then the 2 math classes that don't require a prerequisite to get started. And then as you look at that 24, that was a little bit higher, that placed students up another level. If you look at the 29 placed students up another level as well. And then if you look at the 34, that the 29 and then the 34, they're within the same score cut zone, but 35 begins the next level. And so it was, this was good information for us to look at. If you go to the next slide, please. So on the next slide here, it just takes more of a look at the improvement between the consecutive placement tests. And so we can look at the first, those 229 students were at roughly improved by about almost 9 percentage points, which in some of the cases, that's enough to actually move you up to the next level. With their second to third attempt, it was about 7%. With their third attempt, it was about 5%. And then if they actually went from the 4th to the 5th attempt, you still saw almost 9%. These numbers here aren't above 1 on the far right column, and that's because we had a lot of students who did not do, as well, and so that lowered that number just a little bit there. But this is still refreshing to see that students are actually improving their placement results by reassessing. Next slide. Okay, so on this slide right here, students who took more than 1 placement test. One of the things that we looked at, we tried to look at how much time were they spending in the learning, in the practice and learning modules, and then how many topics did they learn. So for example, if you look at the students who did not improve, they spent an average time, roughly about 7 hours in the placement modules. The average topics they learned was about 35. For whatever reason, they decided not to, they didn't improve. With our students that did improve, they spent about 11, almost 12 hours. If you look at our boot camp was asking students to commit to 12 hours over a 2-week period of time. With this here, they were there and they averaged about 54, almost 55 topics. Students who improved 2 levels, they spent about 14 hours in the placement and practice modules. Students who had actually improved more than 2 placement levels, they spent a total of 23 hours. So one of the things that we tried to emphasize with our students, especially our students who are going into specialized programs like nursing and programs that require a higher level of math, you don't have to necessarily start with math your first quarter, but you can spend the entire first quarter building your skills and then reassess closer towards the end of the quarter when it's time to register for the upcoming term. And that may be a way for students to, again, to shave some time off of their educational plan and actually get into the class that's right for them as opposed to starting with a developmental class. Next slide, please. Okay.
So here we basically have as a summary of what James was just talking through. Just in the last year, we've had 399 students work in that ALEKS Prep and Learning module. For that whole group, it's an average of 8 hours and 47.2 topics learned or mastered in that prep and learning. And roughly 73% of students who took that assessment more than once placed at least 1 course higher. So those are really promising numbers, and hopefully moving forward, since we've been doing this now just for 1 year, that's a really short amount of time, but hopefully we'll have more sort of incentive to share, sharing this data with students can help them see it is worth their time to spend a little time in that, because saving that 1 class, that's 3 months out of your life, and tuition and textbook fees and everything else that is, it's huge. And we don't have that much time to give away. All right. And
no, I would agree with you. And I'd say before we go to the next slide, Rachel, if we could just, from the participants, if you work with students and you help, get them enrolled for classes and things like that, what are some of the concerns that you hear from students, when you're talking to them about starting with their math, or why it's important to start with their math? If you could just maybe put that in the chat, just some of the concerns that you hear from students, with their hesitation to start with their math classes right away.
Don't worry, I don't take offense when students tell me they hate math. I know it's not me.
KP, do the participants have access? Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you go. Beard,
Yeah.
yeah.
They have access.
Yeah, James, if you're ready for questions, there's a few in the chat that I know that they've been there for a little bit, and they're good questions.
Okay.
So the
Yeah,
first
so-
one is from
well-
Emily Beard.
Yeah.
Her question is, do we just use Alex on a case-by-case basis, or is it used more widely, which I know we've covered? And then the cost associated with AccuPlacer and Alex, it looks like the students pay for them. And can you elaborate a little bit on our cost and how that works here?
Okay, yes. So as far as the cost, when we first rolled out the Alex, we had a COVID pandemic special. So it was like $10 a unit. So of course we tried to buy as many as we could with that. When we look at the AccuPlacer, I think we end up paying like, $2 a unit or something along those lines. And so there's a difference there. The regular price for the Alex is about $25 per student, and that's for an entire year. And with that, though, the difference when you compare, apples to apples, is that built-in learning and the learning modules. The students have access for a whole year to being able to go in and practice and build their skills and things like that. One of the things that we had to do, we had to be a little bit cautious of how we were going to administer the Alex so that we didn't run out. So we made a decision early on that if the student indicated that they were certificate or degree seeking, they would take the Alex. If they were just visiting, or they were just here for one class, they would take the AccuPlacer. So we wanted to basically allow the students who are going to be here more than one quarter the opportunity to actually use the practice and prep modules to brush up on their skills if they wanted to place higher.
As far as study time, are there required study time prior to the Alex exam, or do they have to spend 3 hours just after they've taken their first assessment?
Oh, so that's a great question. So prior to Alex, there are some sample questions that the students can do when they set up their account and things like that. Within the boot camp, we created like a little team site where there's some helpful tips and things like that on math and so on. We still have access to the AccuPlacer app that students can utilize. We have the Math Center if students actually want to brush up before their first attempt. We do tell students that, because they have a total of 5 attempts, they can actually take the Alex the first time and use that as their practice. And if they do, they just need to have the advisor just sign off and say, hey, I'd like to count that as my practice. If they do that, then there's no 3-hour time limit that's required. We gave students a choice. If they didn't want to do the 3 hours, they could actually pay $20 to, I think we called it express retest. So if they wanted to skip the time, they could pay $20. But after their first assessment, they actually could just have their Success Navigator advisor just say, hey, I would like to have the student reassess without practicing.
I don't see any more questions in the chat, except for a lot of persons agreeing that there's a lot of math anxiety when it comes to students.
Well, I'll tell you that we'll do our reflection and just kind of go over some of the things that we learned as a result of this this pilot this year, and then we can open it back up for questions if there is maybe additional questions.
All right. So really, we talked a little bit about the boot camp. That is something that we're looking at tweaking still. It's, we ran it for a few quarters. There's, the idea that perhaps having it completely open to students might not be the best, because we did see some, at least personally, anecdotally, I saw some students just like tell me they were going to come and then they never showed up and they never got around to it because other more pressing things for them. So we've considered making it a half a credit or something like that. We're working on that still, but there may be some adjustments to it. So that was one piece that we're still kind of fine tuning and looking what other institutions have done along those lines.
And I think we always talk about that saying that students don't do optional. And so even though our advisors and success navigators were working hard and encouraging students to sign up for the boot camp to get that help, you know, the numbers weren't where we really wanted them to be in order to make the impact that we wanted to make.
And then, you know, the concept of just intentionally referring students, you know, in addition to that boot camp, we do have a math center and a learning and tutoring center where any student, they don't have to currently be enrolled in a math class. Any student can go in and get help on fractions. Let's just pull out the big F word, right? Whatever they're working on that they're struggling with. And of course, our math centers are designed for math, but the learning and tutoring centers help with all levels as well. So more just making those facilities there, available, welcoming. That's something that we've made more intentional over the past few years.
Yes, I would agree. And, you know, usually each quarter the math, center will send an email and say, hey, is the new boot camp flyer out yet? Or, hey, what about this? You know, and so it's one of those things that is great to know that they're still referring students to the boot camp. And we're definitely going to sit down this summer and decide what's the best direction to go, which kind of goes into that last bullet there. You know, when we look at some of the data, we had over 1,000 students complete at least a first assessment, but yet we only had 18% of our students that actually attempted a second placement test. But when you look at the results of the students who are doing the second placement test, it was something like 83% of those, 76% of those students are scoring into the next level. So if we're having that kind of success that they're scoring into the next level, if for anything, you could encourage a student, would you like to shave a quarter off your time? And would you like to save about, $350, $400? Well, let's have you just spend a little time practicing and then reassess. And especially for the students who are just one cut score away into assessing into the next level. The other thing that we looked at is the pass rate of these students. Students who actually use the ALEKS and enrolled in classes, if they pass with either A, B, C, or a passing grade, because developmental is just pass or fail, it was 83%. When we look at students that were in all math classes compared to other students, I do believe the rate there was 76 or maybe 70. I don't have that in front of me right now, but it was still higher than the average of students who entered, through either ACT scores or they entered through high school transcripts, or maybe because they had already taken the prerequisite. So that alone lets us know that we really need to find some more opportunities on how we can be intentional of getting students to that second assessment. And so I have a feeling that we'll be working with closely with our advising team and with our advised CRM specialist to have some automated communication that goes out after a student has completed their assessment test, and then just making sure that staff are intentional in following up with students, and maybe it's encouraging them to wait to the next quarter to register for their math. We have a lot of good data here at MCC on students who take math in their first or second quarter. And just, I'm excited about the opportunity of knowing that if a student can actually brush up a little bit, refresh their skills and get into the correct math class the first time, that may be the difference between a student taking 3 math classes or only having to take 1 or 2 to complete their program requirement. So we'll open it up and see if there's any other questions. Matt, some of these comments are kind of nice. We had asked that question about what are some of the things that you hear from students, their fear about math. I'm bad at math. Students would just start me at the lowest level. This was a regular response. I remember when I advised hearing that from students.
I think when it comes to math placement, that's the only placement where students try to argue that maybe they place too high.
Have you heard that argument before?
Yeah, I think they said, I think I answered some questions that I might not have should have got right. I don't know if I should have placed this high.
Well, and that can happen sometimes with a multiple choice assessment tool, which is one of the nice things. Alex is not multiple choice.
I think it happens on the AccuPlacer more often than
yeah, because if you guess and you guess lucky, the program doesn't know it was a guess.
So I guess, one thought I had earlier was, students that are coming right out of high school might have more success jumping straight into math once they just left math versus post-traditional students, where I've been absent from math for 10 years. I think Alex might be a good place for me, rather not because I don't have valid ACT scores anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, especially like for a student who's maybe they're doing prerequisite to get into the nursing program, getting that student and, connected with Alex right away and having them spend some time practicing, that could be the difference between them, having to take 3 math classes or just 1 or 2, especially being able to brush up on their skills.
We got a good question from Claudia. Her question is, do students have ability to access the learning modules for Alex prior to taking the first exam, or do they only get access after the first exam?
Because the prep and learning modules, the questions themselves are personalized for that student based on how they perform. If a student does practice on something they don't need to practice, it misses the mark. So they take that initial placement test, and then their personalized prep and learning modules will become available. So if you demonstrate on your placement that you understand fractions and decimals, you've already earned that. It's like a pie shape that fills up as they practice and learn. So that initial test, and that's why I kind of like to call it a pre-test or a practice test, take a little of the pressure off. It's just, let's find out where we need to start working by taking this initial assessment, and then we get the practice that opens up after that.
I think it's helpful to have the AccuPlacer study app as an application on your phone. I have students that I have used that study tool first before they use the Alex or sign up for that.
Yes. And kind of like anything, you can still kind of refresh your memory on order operation and things like that. Once you get in there, either you know it or you don't know it once you start working the problems. As Rachel said, you can guess with the multiple choice, but it's actually going to have you solve the problem with the Alex. And you never get more than 30 questions, but it's already determining what you know. So if you know a certain level, it's going to, after a question or two, skip that and go to some other more complex questions. But you will actually have a diagnostic assessment of your skills at that point, and then know what you need to work on and what you don't have to spend so much time on. And then having the math center or the instructor come back in and then provide some of that feedback and guidance. That's the big thing. And everything that we're doing here at MCC right now with Path Forward and removing barriers for students, we see this as being a real positive tool that we can actually implement, because it's really, I did some math here the other day, and I'll share this real quick, but we were just looking at, it was about 238 credit hours total that we saved students that actually successfully took 1 or more placements. And then I translated that and said, okay, what does that mean as far as dollars and things like that, things that students would understand? And so let me see if I can pull that up here real quick. So just a couple of things that I highlighted, because again, it's about how can we help these students. So if you look at the 167 students that actually, took a second assessment and improved, the things that come to mind, 170 of those students right off the bat had 1 less quarter of math. They saved themselves either $319 or $426. For those that did 2, they saved themselves $639 or $745, and they now shaved 2 quarters off of their math. And then for the student, the 11 that scored 3 levels higher, they saved themselves $958 or $1,065. And I base that on 4.5 credit hours, or if they had to take 1 6 credit hour class. But again, and then 3 less quarters of math. I mean, when you hear those things right there, it's just, you know, the time in. And so we feel very good about the fact that we established our guidelines as 12 hours of practice, because we're seeing that there's some good return on the students' investment if they practice for 12 hours. And they don't have to do 2 assessments. They can do that first assessment. Instead of stopping at 3, they can go ahead and do the whole 12 and see where they're at.
James, I'd be interested to see when the students save those math classes, they're filling them up with other major requirements, so their graduation completion is probably as well, right?
That should be the other goal, because now they have less of a pathway to complete their math requirements if they're taking those other gen eds. And for the institution, totally those 215 students, that was about $55,000 that we saved students. I don't see that as lost revenue. I see that as $55,000 as an investment closer to helping those students graduate, because now they're on track. They're feeling good about what they're doing. Math is not a barrier for them. Instead, it's something that they're actually able to get out of the way sooner than later.
And from an instructor's perspective, fewer students in those developmental sequences makes a big difference. When I have, on occasion, I've had a student place into my pre-algebra class, a developmental class, and they clearly don't belong there. They should have tested higher. They should have done the retake. And I can tell usually about 2-3 weeks into the quarter, it does make a difference. As an instructor, I feel pressure because I see a student who basically is bored. Sometimes the rest of the class feels pressure because there's this, smarty pants over there who's getting everything, and it has a negative impact on those other students who are in the right place. So it just makes sense all the way around, and I realize the majority of our audience here is advisors and placement personnel. We want our students to be placed in the right spot. If that means that we have fewer courses and, we have to cut back on adjuncts because we don't have as many students that need to take as many levels of math. The point is teaching them where they need to be, not necessarily where they started.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of bad things happen as a result of the pandemic, but I would say that this is one good thing. I don't think we would have had the resources to pilot Alex if it wasn't for the CARES Act. So hopefully we can use this as a building block to continue to implement Alex and use it to help students.
Well, we're at 4:13. I believe the breakout ends at 4:15. Thank you, James and Rachel, for sharing all that great data. Hopefully we get to keep Alex here at Metro moving forward. I know I have a lot of students ask for it. Is there anything you guys would like to say before we close out?
Just thanks for joining. If you have any questions, I think our email is listed. Feel free to reach out to us. We just tried to give a quick overview, but if there's more specific questions you want to know, let us know.
Awesome. Thank you both.